All right, welcome to episode number 14 of the Command Center. I'm your host, Richard WEISS. I'm joined by
Avi.
And today's episode is going to be a doozy, let me tell you. So we're going to discuss an update on Iran, an update on Lebanon, and we got a segment on Greta Thunberg, as well as another segment on international anti-Semitism. So before we actually get into everything, let's get started with a clip here from ILTV, and it's going to be a quick minute and a half or so sit rep of what is happening with all fronts of the war. And without any further ado, here we go.
Well, the U.S. begins a naval blockade of Iranian ports in retaliation for the Tehran regime's attempt to stop shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump claims the Iranians are still eager to make a deal, and U.S. officials, they are open to further talks if the regime shows more flexibility towards such proposals as the removal of all enriched uranium and a 20-year ban on its nuclear program. Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, holds unprecedented direct talks with his Lebanese counterpart, Nada Hamadeh, in Washington under the mediation of Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Hezbollah chief Naim Qassam condemns the talks as capitulation, threatens the Beirut government, and vows the terror group will continue to attack Israel. The IDF eliminates hundreds of Hezbollah terrorists and strikes on Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and South Lebanon, also taking out rocket launches, drones, military infrastructure, anti-tank missile launch points, and terror command centers. Hezbollah continues to daily fire dozens of missiles at Israel, and Reserve Sergeant Major Ayal Uriel Bianco becomes the latest IDF casualty in Lebanon after his Humvee overturns during combat operations. Amid ongoing clashes in Gaza, Israeli forces neutralized several armed terrorists approaching the Yellow Line border. Among them, Yusuf Ibrahim Basheti, part of a cell that killed 21 IDF soldiers with an anti-tank missile in January 2024.
All right. So, that right there is a very brief update of everything that's kind of really been happening over the last 24 hours. I think what's most important and where we should really kind of start now, something I didn't really think we would be seeing, at least not this year, and that's direct peace talks between Israel and Lebanon.
Yep. First time since 1983 that they've actually sat face to face and had talks. Israel and Lebanon, there was a maritime treaty with some natural gas fields, but that was done indirectly through mediation. And then even the quote unquote ceasefire with the fighting with Hezbollah, with that deal that was worked out before, that was done. It was Lebanese civilians and Israeli civilians, like no government officials communicating. So this is a historic moment. It's been decades in the making. It illustrates that in the Middle East, things are changing. It's a new world. And a large portion of that comes to what has changed. There is less fear of Iranian interference. To think that Lebanon would be speaking directly to the Israelis with Hezbollah actively speaking out against it is unfathomable. Even a year ago, you wouldn't have believed it. But the dynamics of power in the Middle East are changing. It's something we've talked about a lot on this podcast, and the weakening of Iran has opened up an opportunity, and Lebanon sees a moment where Hezbollah is at the weakest it's ever been, and the Lebanese government is putting the Lebanese people first, and they're holding these direct talks.
Yeah, I think that the Lebanese government is finally waking up to the fact that Hezbollah is their greatest threat, not Israel, and that the only way for them to live peacefully and enjoy the quiet is without Hezbollah. And they know that they can't do it themselves. They've been promising us for 20, 25 years that they will disarm Hezbollah so long as we leave them alone. And we've left them alone, and they can't. So together, we're gonna rid Lebanon and perhaps the entire Middle East of Hezbollah. And this is just another example of peace through strength. The way Israel ragdolled Iran over the last little bit, and all of its proxies, Lebanon wants to be on that side, not on, on the giving end, not the receiving end.
Yeah, it's a bold. People need to understand. Like, you have to study the history of the land. Like, it's a lot of people might look at it and say, oh, okay, so Lebanon's meeting with Israel. Wow, how brave of them. It actually is, right? Rafik Hariri, the former prime minister of Lebanon, was assassinated in Lebanon. What was 2004, 2005? Like, we're not talking about decades in the past. This is like recently an important Lebanese politician was assassinated for his political beliefs. So it's a huge deal that Lebanon is openly having these conversations with Israel, that they've allowed those pictures to be taken. It's a monumental moment, and it shouldn't be dismissed as just they communicated. Communicating openly with Israel is a huge step, and it's a giant step in the right direction. And everyone who is, you're going to know who really is pro-peace and who isn't by who's talking about and celebrating these talks. Because if you are truly pro-peace and you really want what's best in the region, then these talks between Lebanon and Israel are massive and need to be celebrated. And it's a very positive step. What happens moving forwards, it's hard to know, right? There's still Hezbollah is still the gigantic elephant in the room. But this is a huge win for people who advocate peace. And just there's been a bunch of nice stories of people talking about their time in Beirut, and it illustrates what we talked about in our episode on Lebanon and Hezbollah, the similarities between life in Beirut and life in Tel Aviv. One of the things you're hearing as people are talking about the idea of peace is conversations with Lebanese in Beirut, who understand that Israelis and the Lebanese people have a shared future and a shared interest in living and moving forwards from this time. And this is a wonderful moment in the history of the Middle East, and it needs to be celebrated.
I agree. I think really the only thing that really could derail this would be Hezbollah successfully assassinating some high-ranking members of the Lebanese government in order to stop these talks. That could be the only thing that would derail these talks, because I think as far as the Lebanese people go and the people who live in northern Israel go, and as far as spending nights in bomb shelters and coming home to destroyed homes, they're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
And it's enough already. And, as they say in Arabic and sometimes in Hebrew, halas. It's
time. We're going to see what's going to happen. There's a guy Philip Smith. He's one of the leading experts on Hezbollah in the world. Like, if you want to understand Hezbollah, watch him, follow him, read his stuff. He put out a tweet the other day that I just want to read because of what it says, what it actually means. He wrote, "I had to stop counting / updating my spreadsheets because the numbers of killed Hezbollah members jumped to a level I hadn't seen in years. They're still staggering the releases, but the numbers lost have been through the roof." They are getting worked in southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
And this is the weakest they've ever been, and this is the moment. It's why we're seeing Lebanon and Lebanese politicians take the bold steps that they're taking. This is the weakest Hezbollah has ever been.
Yeah, I think Hezbollah's days are numbered. I think a long and true and very amicable peace between the two countries is on the horizon, and it's about time. It really is. I don't think I don't think if there's the dog.
There's the dog.
I don't think that it's that the conditions for Hezbollah to, once they've been gotten rid of, I don't think the Lebanese are going to allow the conditions for Hezbollah to pop up again to happen.
No, this is ultimately we've talked about it. Them being folded into broader Lebanese society, right? They already have government officials, right? They already play a role in Lebanese governance. It would be taking what's left of Hezbollah, the fighting force, and integrating them in, and I think this is sort of where it's at, and them becoming just a political party. And they can be a political party that runs on an anti-Israel slate if they want. But the idea is, let's get peace in some capacity across the finish line now, so that when they are merged into Lebanese society, which I think is the logical step with how you finish Hezbollah, once they get there, they don't want to be the party running against progress.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of how I see it. At the end of the day, Lebanon and Israel, because of their similarities, could have an incredibly fruitful peace. It could be an amazing peace, or it could be like the peace Israel has with Egypt, right? They have peace. Israeli tourists can go to Egypt and not worry about their safety.
Mm-hmm.
But that's about it.
Yeah.
And that's okay too. Like, you don't need to be best friends. The idea is it would be a positive first step if everyone just stopped trying to kill each other.
100%. Do you think that, it's been mentioned, and I think this makes sense too, Syria is going to have to be on board with this as well, and probably going to have to be a part of this as well for this to gain traction, for this to actually hold and work. And I wasn't all that sure, and I'm still not 100% sure about, the new regime in Syria. But what I do know is they are not the old regime in Syria. They're definitely an improvement from the old regime in Syria. History is being written and is going to be written for the next little while when it comes to that little plot of land over there. But there's a lot happening and a lot changing. Goalposts are moving. The only thing I guess even borders are going to move a little bit because Israel's probably going to have a buffer zone. I think there was a part of Israel's kind of what they want to see happen. I guess they're not their demands, but their requests as far as this peace deal goes. They're going to want an 8 to 10 kilometer buffer zone into southern Lebanon that they will have full control of, and they're not putting settlements or anything like that in there. But anyone who lives in that 8 to 10 kilometer buffer zone will be permanently displaced to the north. Israel will be allowed to and will be responsible for maintaining a Hezbollah-free southern Lebanon and everything south of the Litani River. And then everything north of the Litani River will be the responsibility of the Lebanese army to keep that area Hezbollah free.
Yeah. So first, regarding Syria, Jolani has proven himself to be a very capable leader. It's sometimes it's difficult to talk about someone when they were the leader of an Al-Qaeda terror group. Like it seems like it's a weird thing. Like, let's be honest about who Jolani was. But since he's taken command of Syria and control, he's moved in a very slow and steady pace. And that's promising because it's allowed him to keep control over a lot of different groups. Right? The Syrian civil war wasn't just Assad versus rebels. There were like dozens and dozens of different groups that were all fighting Assad, and they were fighting each other, and it was a very complicated situation. So he's running a really smart balancing act at the moment. He's proven himself to be very pragmatic, and the hope would be that he can understand, like, me, you have to be able to rise through the ranks that he did, right? From a fighter to a local commander to the commander of Al-Qaeda forces in Syria to now essentially the president of Syria. There's brains in him, and he must be able to see what's been happening and know, like, if I allow 100,000 people to try to storm over the Golan, are they gonna conquer Jerusalem, or is it gonna end up with me losing my life and losing the power? I think he's a pragmatic person, so I have hopes for Jolani. When I've been discussing Syria in the past before he rose to power, he was always the guy that I thought could bridge that gap, where we've discussed before that a lot of countries have been built off of terrorists or who would be considered terrorists, and they become functioning members of society. That's human history.
Mm-hmm.
I do think he's the right guy. And just a little known thing about Syria right now, in official Syrian documentation, when they show a map of Syria, it doesn't include the Golan Heights. So if you're looking for some positive signs, they're not printing maps where they've taken back the entire Golan, which shows a pragmatism, which I think is very a sense of optimism for that. And then, regarding Lebanon, that's how you negotiate, right? Israel gives its position, and Lebanon will counter with one of its positions, and they'll work it out. I have faith in the Secretary of State Marco Rubio being the one leading this.
Mm-hmm.
He's
the all-star of that administration.
And I think he recognizes how huge this would be for him personally as well. It would be huge for the Trump administration and for President Trump. So Israel's going to make demands. It's ultimately going to end up, that podcast we did on Lebanon, Hezbollah, and the war was pretty much a spoiler for what's happened so far. And I think that's what we're going to see, is there's going to be that little bit of a buffer zone. The Israelis are creating it right now. They're blowing up and demolishing whole areas of southern Lebanon, and it's not going to allow people from southern Lebanon to move back. The idea is that this isn't going to be like every other time Israel's gone to war, right? They push people back and then it ends, there's a ceasefire, and Hezbollah moves back. So if you blow up most of the areas in Beit Jabel that they're doing, if you clear a lot of the area in Qiyam and the other areas of southern Lebanon, it doesn't allow them to move the civilian population back and give Hezbollah freedom of movement to navigate within the population there. So they're clearing the path for that, because I think they know they're not going to get all the way to the Litani, but having that buffer zone is what they're setting that up right now.
Their ability to hide within civilian populations is their greatest weapon as well. It's they've played the local population like a harp. They show up and they say, let's build you schools and mosques and parks and roads. And then the next thing you know, those schools and mosques and parks and roads are all army bases. And they come in with all these promises, but all they deliver is destruction. And now the Lebanese people are done with them.
Well, that's the difference. One of the big differences between this go around and times past is the majority of the populations in southern Lebanon left. They actually listened to the warnings and they fled. In 2006, there was still a lot of there were still a lot of civilians that stayed around, which made navigating to conquer some of these areas very difficult. When the civilian population leaves, it allows more freedom of movement, and you can be more aggressive with your tactics. Which is actually one of the people like to talk about international law. Well, one of the big practices in international law and the Geneva Conventions is you have a responsibility. If you can get the civilian population of the battlefield to move, you're required to do so because it protects them. So Israel gave warning to southern Lebanon, and the civilians moved. And it's taken away that key factor that Hezbollah could depend on before. Like if they're sneaking from one house to another, but there's a family in one of those houses, makes it hard to deal with them. But when a town is completely evacuated and you know that the only people there are Hezbollah, it makes it easier to operate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, well, let's get into our next segment. I got a clip from Emily Schrader from JNS. I should also mention and give credit before we do move on that last clip that we did play was from ILTV, and the anchor's name was Caleb Ben David. You can find ILTV on YouTube or iltv.com. So I'm going to now move to our next segment over here, and this is from JNS, and this is Emily Schrader. We've shown some of her clips before, and I absolutely do think she's brilliant. And hold on a second, Avi, where'd you go? Hold on. One moment. Scroll down, and in you go. Okay. Nope. You're back. All right. Hi, Avi. How's it going? Yeah. Missed you. All right. So I'm gonna put on Emily Schrader. I think she's brilliant. I love the way she's ruthless. She doesn't hold back. Anyways.
What we saw this week around the ceasefire between the Islamic Republic and the U.S. is not a diplomatic miscommunication. It's a real-time example of the same kind of subversion and narrative manipulation that we just talked about. When President Trump announced the ceasefire, he referenced 10 points that were under discussion for the talks. But almost immediately, the Islamic Republic leaked its own version of events to the international media, and through its media arms, a list of 10 points that were presented to the world as if they were a part of a agreed upon deal, even though they weren't the same 10 points that were approved. And in many cases, some of these points weren't even a part of any serious negotiation between the two parties. On cue, the Western media immediately ran with it. Public figures ran with it, politicians ran with it, and suddenly you had an entire global conversation built around terms that didn't exist that made the US look incredibly weak, like President Trump had failed in his war objectives. This entire effort was a psyop, and not even a sophisticated one. This was a petty attempt to stir up chaos, shift blame, and get the whole world to start condemning Israel for something that it was never even a part of. Because one of the key elements that they inserted into this fake framework was Lebanon, specifically the idea that a ceasefire somehow included limitations on Israeli action in Lebanon, despite the fact that Israel was not a party to these talks and had not been consulted on any of it. And again, last I checked, Lebanon is not in Iran. And if Iran is negotiating on behalf of Lebanon, that's not a part of the story, that's the entire problem. But once that idea was out there, everything else followed. Suddenly you have people asking, why is Israel violating terms that don't exist? You have world leaders calling for restraint based on conditions that were never agreed to. And the entire conversation shifts away from the regime and onto Israel, which is exactly what this was designed to do by the regime. The White House had to come out and clarify that these 10 points were not part of any agreed deal, and Lebanon was indeed not a part of the ceasefire. And then the regime doubled down by adding another claim in the international media about unfreezing assets, which, again, not agreed to, but by that point it almost doesn't matter because the narrative has already taken hold. The talks started, the talks failed, and now we're watching the next phase with the Strait of Hormuz. But if we don't learn from this, it'll just be the same thing all over again. And what's honestly more concerning than the regime doing this is how many world leaders just went along with it without even understanding what they're talking about. You had members of Congress and European leaders openly calling for a ceasefire in Lebanon without even knowing what the terms were, who was involved, or why there was even a conflict in Lebanon in the first place. Leaders like Keir Starmer, the Foreign Minister Yvette Cooper, Emmanuel Macron, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres all came out demanding Israel respect a non-existent ceasefire in Lebanon because a terrorist dictatorship demands it, even though that same dictatorship doesn't govern Lebanon, doesn't represent Lebanon, and has spent decades undermining Lebanon through Hezbollah. And
all right. Well, I mean, you remember, like, I think it was October 23rd, 2023, when Israel when Israel was accused of hitting that hospital. And it turned out it was a PIJ missile that misfired. And there's a video of it launching from Gaza, doing a couple figure eights in the sky, and then landing in that hospital compound. But like, as soon as Israel was blamed for that, like the second, like Israel was guilty until proven innocent. It was as simple as that. Guilty until proven innocent. And Israel, even after showing the video evidence that should vindicate it, the damage has already been done. And this has been a cycle that has gone on, not just in this conflict, but in pretty well every conflict Israel's been a part of, even since before the invention of the internet. What do you think, Avi?
Yeah, I mean, that hospital one, they held a press conference at the hospital with bodies in front of the podium, talking that these were bodies from the bombing that happened. And everyone ran with it. The Sun, like the New York Times, took a picture of a different destroyed building and put that on their cover with the news that Israel bombed the hospital. But the sun came up and the satellites opened and everyone could see it, and the hospital was still there. But no one learned from it. It wasn't a mea culpa moment where people said, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm too emotional in this and I'm jumping on every story. We got this so wrong. There was no one took, like, no one said anything. There was no learning from it. There was no remorse. The media just kept, the same people who pushed that story were just given more opportunities to commit more lies. There was no one learned anything from it. They invented a fake attack, dragged, and the bodies thing always bothered me because it means they either faked the dead bodies or they pulled dead bodies from a morgue to be used as props for propaganda. But no one talked about it. And then it just repeats itself over and over again. And everyone wants to follow the same, like everyone wants to believe every terrible thing you hear about Israel. It's a path, like it's pathological at this point, right? The Game of Thrones actor Liam Cunningham shared a story, right? There was just the other day, 60 Palestinians were trying to sneak into Israel for work, and they hid in the back of a garbage truck to get in. And the Israeli police stopped the truck and opened the top, and they found 60 Palestinians who were sneaking into Israel for work. Like, they weren't terrorists, they were workers. They were looking for work. But then everyone took that story and said, look how terrible Israel is. They transport Palestinians in the back of a garbage truck, and they share that story. Like, Reuters reported it properly. They covered that the Israeli police stopped this truck. They found 60 Palestinians who were sneaking into the country. Reuters covered it properly. The Reuters reporter on the ground reshared the articles, like the captions on social media, claiming that Israel was putting Palestinians in a garbage truck. It's just people want to believe the worst things about Israel, and there's no stopping it. And that has plagued it. The big issue is it's serious people that are doing it. It's people with real power that are doing it. Right? The head of the United Nations believes every horrible thing you can believe about Israel. He runs with every terrible story. These politicians,
of our country,
they jump on every negative story, and it takes away from a solution, and it's pathological, and it's hard to explain. But Israel's enemies know how to play the game. They know they can say anything. And that's one thing Israel has not adapted to. Israel still believes in this idea that people are going to hear the truth and then everything will be okay. But we are living in a post-truth world, and they need to start to figure out how to combat that, because it's plaguing and infecting all elements of society.
I mean, let's call it what it is, Avi. It's anti-Semitism. But let's forget about that fancy scientific term. It's fucking Jew hatred is what it is. It's plain and simple. And I mean, it's, well, how can these little lies hurt you, Richard? I'll fucking tell you how. Swear jar. Because these stories get published without being fact checked. People believe them, and then synagogues get shot up. Well, you know what? I go to a synagogue every Saturday morning with my parents. Like it could be just a matter of time before. I mean, if synagogues are getting shot at, forget about Toronto. That's a big city. But in like small places in Michigan and in small town USA, well, Winnipeg is not much different. Like, it's really not much different. And this now becomes a threat, not just, to the Israel reputation, but it becomes a threat to people like me and my family. And I think to people like you as well.
Yep. I mean, look at propaganda that breaks people down is what leads to horrific acts, right? The Rwandan genocide, it didn't just spring out of nowhere. They were using radio broadcasts to turn part of the country against another part of the country. They were breaking it down. The Holocaust didn't start with the death camps. It started with cartoons. Like, that's how it starts.
Yeah.
When you break something down, and in a world where no one is fact checking, where we know we have an issue with mental health in the West. We know we have an issue with access to weapons in the West. It's setting up for bad things to happen, right? A guy thought, remember, right? Pizzagate. A man thought they were transporting children through pizza places, and he took a gun into a pizza place. Like, people laugh at this idea, but it's true. The dehumanization of an entire people doesn't lead anywhere good.
No.
And that's why these things need to be stopped. And we need politicians who are supposed to be leaders to be able to differentiate between fact and fiction.
And to call out the fiction, like, it's not up to us to call that out. Like, it's up to the leaders that we elect to be our leaders.
That might be asking too much from politicians nowadays. At least don't fall for the fiction. Like, we're asking bare minimum, at least don't fall for the fiction. And it's, I mean, this is where we're at. So it makes sense, right? The Iranians know they're going to get ahead of it. It happened with the hostage rescue, right? When the Israelis rescued those 4 hostages in that unbelievably heroic and amazing hostage rescue, what was the first thing that actually came out? Hamas immediately spread the rumor, 200 civilians were killed. So what does the story become? The 200 civilians that were killed, not the fact that the Israelis attempted and pulled off this very bold hostage rescue from the middle of a Hamas-controlled area. And the story wasn't that these Israeli hostages were being held by doctors. The story was the 200 hostages, because Israel's enemies know how to play the game. They just have to put anything out there, and then it'll get covered as fact. So they immediately said it's 200 civilians. If you listen to the recordings, right, Israel released some of the body cam footage of the hostage rescues. When you listen to the sounds, it is just a tsunami of gunfire, AK-47s, RPKs, PKM, like guns that are used by Hamas. Yep. There's right? They make a different noise. Not all guns sound the same when they're fired. So when you listen to the video, it is a blanket of fire coming from Hamas, and that's what happened to the Israeli forces. They were being overrun by Hamas in the area because they knew they were there and they went to attack them. But Hamas knew they would lose face and they would look bad if news of this hostage rescue was allowed to be told truthfully. So they immediately got their media outlets to work, and it was 200 civilians were killed, and that became the topic. It happens all the time.
Idiots did their jobs.
And everyone just immediately follows it.
Yeah. Well, again, anti-Semitism. So here's Emily Schrader again with a little bit more on anti-Semitism. And I'm going to play it right now. I hope I got the right spot.
And with that, let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly from this week. Kicking things off with the bad. There is a lot of it this week, but I have to start with one person because this perfectly captures the level of ignorance we're dealing with right now. This week, I ended up arguing on X with Martina Navratilova, the tennis player, which was not really something I had on my bingo card, but here we are. And what was striking about it was not just that she is wrong, it was how confidently wrong she is while speaking on something she clearly does not understand. Because she, like so many others this week, was repeating the claim that Israel's strikes in Lebanon were war crimes and that hundreds of civilians were killed, as if that was an established fact. Except that at the time those claims were being made, there was no way for anyone, including her, to know who was a civilian and who was not, because the numbers coming out of Lebanon don't distinguish between combatants and civilians. But what we do know is that of approximately 254 people killed in those strikes, Israel's confirmed that more than 180 were Hezbollah operatives, and Hezbollah itself has been putting out martyr posters nonstop, which means you're looking at a ratio of around 70% combatants in a wave of strikes that Israel didn't start. Israel didn't start this war. That is not a war crime. But here's the real problem for people like Martina, and she's not alone in this. People are throwing around terms like war crimes based on 20-second video clips of some kind of explosion without having the most basic understanding of what actually makes something a war crime, because you don't know who the target was. You don't know what intelligence went into that strike. You don't know what precautions were taken. You don't know whether there was advance warning. You do not know whether it was a dual use site or a strict military objective. And in most of these cases, the people commenting don't even know how to differentiate between a legal strike and an illegal strike, which is the principles of proportionality, distinction, and a military advantage to be gained by carrying out that strike. And yet, people are making crazy legal claims with absolute certainty as a form of performative moral narcissism. And we know because the same people who are now suddenly experts in international law have been completely silent on the Islamic Republic's crimes against its own people, from mass executions to the slaughter of children to the massacre of more than 40,000 protesters. But when Israel acts against a terrorist organization, suddenly everybody's a lawyer. And that should really tell you everything that you need to know. This isn't about law or civilians. This is about people wanting to feel morally superior without actually doing the work of understanding what they're talking about. And in the process, they're not just misinforming people, they're actually reinforcing the exact narratives that the Islamic Republic is trying to push. So no, Martina, you don't get to declare something a war crime from your phone after watching a clip on social media. That's not how this works. Stick to tennis. Jihadist propaganda doesn't suit you. And now for the ugly story of this week. This is one that's kind of hard to watch, and it should be, because what we just saw in Spain is not some random protest or something done in poor taste. It's something that echoes a very long and very dark history. This week, during an Easter celebration, a giant effigy of Prime Minister Netanyahu was paraded through the streets and during this Easter celebration, and then blown up in front of a crowd that included families and children, with people cheering as it happened. And if you think that looks uncomfortably close to public execution theater, you're not imagining it, because in Spain, that kind of spectacle has a history. This is a country where in 1391, waves of pogroms swept through Jewish communities, with thousands of Jews murdered in the streets by mobs, not quietly, not hidden, but publicly and violently. A country that then created the Spanish Inquisition, where Jews and converts, so-called conversos, were hunted, tortured, and executed in public ceremonies, where people were burned alive in front of crowds. This is a country that in 1492 issued the Alhambra Decree, that expelled tens of thousands of Jews from their homes, forcing them to convert or leave under threat of death. And way before that expulsion, many were already forced into conversion through violence, massacres, and social pressure, with entire communities destroyed. So when you see a crowd gathering during a religious holiday to watch a figure representing the only Jewish state in the world be publicly destroyed, this doesn't exist in a vacuum. It looks like something that's happened there before. And it's not happening in a vacuum today either, because under Pedro Sanchez, Spain has entered a new era of Jew hatred, where anti-Israel rhetoric has bled into something much uglier. where government tone, media framing, and public discourse have really created an environment where this kind of spectacle is not only possible, but accepted. And that should make people pay attention. And now finally for the good story of this week, actually related to what I just spoke about, the US government finally revoked the green cards of multiple Iranian nationals with direct ties to the Islamic regime. And some of them were arrested by federal agents and are now in ICE custody facing deportation. Finally. Now, one of them is Saeed Isa Hashemi, who was living in the United States with his wife and child after being granted a green card through the diversity visa program. Hashemi is the son of Masume Ebtekar, better known as Screaming Mary, who was the English language spokesperson for the Iranian students who stormed the U.S. Embassy in 1979 and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. Now, according to the State Department, she didn't just defend the hostage takers. She actively helped produce propaganda, staging interviews where American hostages were pressured to claim that they were being treated well, while in reality they were being held in solitary confinement, blindfolded, starved, and subjected to beatings and mock executions. Now, she was the face of that crisis, going on international television, defending it, justifying it, spinning it for the world. And her son has been living in the United States freely and legally for years. The child of one of the most prominent propaganda figures from one of the most traumatic attacks on the United States in modern history, living here in the United States under a green card. Well, thanks to Marco Rubio this week, that status was terminated and he was taken into custody pending removal. And this isn't an isolated case. Days earlier, U.S. authorities also arrested Hamideh Soleimani Afshar, the niece of Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC commander responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American service members, along with her daughter after their green cards were revoked. Now, she was living in L.A., living a life of luxury, but also openly supporting the regime, even praising attacks on Americans while living on American soil. Now, as of now, this is at least the fifth case in recent weeks where individuals with ties to the Islamic Republic or its elite networks have had their statuses revoked or been blocked from entering the United States. Let's hope that this trend continues. And
all right, so that's it for that clip. Lots to unpack there. I want to start by saying I know three people from Spain. All three are very good supporters of Israel, and none of them are anti-Semites, but they're obviously not in the government.
Yeah, I mean, Spain's always been more on the left when it comes to Europe, and that's always kind of been an issue within European governance. Is left-wing governments tend to be more anti-Israel than others. I know that Pedro Sanchez's wife is involved in some corruption scandals that they knew were brewing for the last couple of years. So it's sometimes that you use the Israel stuff to distract from things that are going to come up, because then it's easy for supporters to say, oh, look, they're prosecuting her because he's taking a stand against Israel. So that's part of it. Look, what she said is right. Like, the effigy stuff is bad, but like I would be okay if, as Jews, we focused more on like modern anti-Semitism and didn't worry as much about the Spanish Inquisition. And I know she's setting like this, like building the history and why it's an issue. I don't always love how much we look like our past is not always great. So I'm not always a big fan of like leaning into the past as much. The burning the effigy is bad. There are people chanting about killing Jews. Those things are bad, and it's gross. I would like to see what things look like without a Bibi Netanyahu. Like, if Israel was kind of able to just finally vote him out and keep him out, like, does this festival then happen 2 years from now? Are they burning an effigy of like a Lubavitch looking rabbi, or are they not doing it all together? Like, for me, that's one of the things I always, because it's easy to mask Jew hatred by hatred of Bibi Netanyahu. He's a pretty easy to hate guy. So they're able to mask it. So I do wonder what it would look like without him. Like, would they burn an effigy of Naftali Bennett? Those
I
are,
think they would just burn an effigy of just a random like hook-nosed bearded
yeah,
Jew.
and then we're dealing with pure, right? Then that's classic. That's classic Jew hatred. Um, Look, one of the things is that it's easy to get wrapped up in a cause when you see everyone doing it and it seems like it's the popular thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's right when they
From the river
educate
to the
kids.
sea.
Yeah, and when they educate kids in schools about bullying, right? The hardest thing the hardest thing to do is to be the kid not being bullied, but the one who stands up for the kid being bullied to the bullies.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard, so it's a very easy thing. We're in a cultural phenomenon right now of look at me culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of this stuff is easy to go along with. So there could be a lot of people at that Spanish gathering that are like don't really understand the history of anti-Semitism through the history of Spain, and they just see like Bibi Netanyahu and they blow it up with firework. Like it's easy for people, I think, to get caught up in it. I'm not downplaying Jew hatred that we're seeing. It's Bibi Netanyahu's always the elephant in the room, though.
Yeah.
Like it just because he is who because of who he is, and it's easy for people to hide. It's easy for people to mask their Jew hatred behind just being anti-Bibi, but it's also easy for people to get caught up in things they don't realize is Jew hatred because of their hatred of Bibi. Like it's a two sides of a coin.
He is a
Yeah,
very polarizing character.
yeah, but I don't want to not downplaying the rise of anti-Semitism. That's not
Not taken that way, at least not by me. Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. It's just the effigy stuff. Yeah, like if it was like that, if it was the running of the Jews like in Borat, that's different. But the BB effigy gives them enough, like a good criminal defense attorney. If that was a trial, like a good attorney could get you off from, oh, it was just BB stuff. Well, forget that. Like so that's he's
fair.
He's the issue.
I don't think there's really any need to comment on the Martina Navratilova bit. I mean, I wanted to include that just to include that as information, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward. She should stick to tennis and stick to navigating downtown.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's an expert on everything. It's like that with American politics. Everyone was an expert on the 25th Amendment, and everyone's an expert on FBI search and seizures, and everyone's an expert on policing, right? Everyone's an expert on everything nowadays.
Everyone's an expert on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
Everyone's an expert, Everyone's an expert on rockets taking off now too. It's
everyone has an opinion. So it's
you watch all right. Well, let's talk about. You talked about some look at me culture. You mentioned that. I think that's the perfect segue to bring up our next and final topic of discussion for this week's episode. So, Greta Thunberg. Now, before we go any further, I promised like at least a dozen people that I wouldn't call names. I wouldn't really, that I would tone it down, and I will. I'm still going to say, I'm still going to get my points across, but I'll try and take the high road. Before I go on my rant, why don't we just give a little bit? So Greta Thunberg, this is now going to be her third, I think, flotilla attempt to break the blockade of Gaza. The first one, they got caught, I think, and she ended her hunger strike with an Israeli pastrami sandwich, I think was how that went down.
Sandwich.
And flew home right beside the bathroom on El Al. The second flotilla attempt, our climate activist was dumped and instructed everyone on the boat to dump their lithium-ion batteries into the Mediterranean Sea off the Israeli coast. I guess to hide evidence or something. So I guess our eco warrior is now becoming eco terrorist, and now her and her global sumud are on their way once again to break the blockade. I don't even know where to begin about her. I mean, I'm going to say this, and I'm choosing my words carefully. Something's not right with that kid. There's obviously more than a couple issues there. She loves the attention. She loves the camera. She's a narcissist. Let me rephrase that so I'm not calling any names. She acts like a narcissist. What is she trying to accomplish? They're not going to get. It's a publicity stunt. I think they're hoping that they get roughed up a little bit so they can say, look what Israel did to us. I mean, that's really, what else have they got to gain from this?
It's mainly publicity. Like there are proper like if you want to help Palestinians, there's a ton of charities that are there. Like you could fundraise money, right? There's things that you could do that will bring actual change or hope to the Palestinians. This is most of the flotilla were like social media influencers also. Like it wasn't like a flotilla of pediatric surgeons and things that were going to Gaza, and they didn't have cargo ships loaded with much needed medicine and it was mainly social media influencers. It's the thing.
They had no supplies or medicine or they had nothing. They had no relief supplies last time.
Yeah, there's also the story. I didn't read it a lot because I don't like there's too many things in the world to worry about, so I didn't read the full story, but I know that there was an uproar within like the flotilla community about like the amount of sex that was being had.
Yes.
Within the flotilla, that it was just kind of like a party, which kind of defeats.
I was reading it that one of the like senior flotillers was I guess grooming the like some of like the first time, like kind of using
exploiting
his
the
position.
First time flotillers.
Yeah, like using his position of experienced flotillae to the grand flotiller, and kind of like, well, if you want to be big and important, you know how to, like it's kind of like I guess he thought he was what
the Harvey Weinstein of
Weinstein's casting couch on the minnow. Do you think? I'm sorry, I gotta say it.
No, just do your rant. Just switch to your rant.
You know what I'm gonna say.
Let's leave the Weinstein stuff in the.
All right. How dare you? All right. So I have a few thoughts that I'd like to close this episode with, and I wrote a few things down, and so it goes a little something like this. How dare you, Greta? Let's stop treating Greta Thunberg like she's untouchable. She built her entire identity on moral clarity, on telling the world there is a right side and a wrong side, that silence is violence, that neutrality is complicity, and 8 years ago, she had the world captivated. Headlines everywhere, politicians scrambling, media treating every word like it was gospel. A teenager scolding world leaders, and millions of people bought into it completely because the optics were great. Those are her rules. So let's apply them to her, shall we? Because the moment she steps into the conflict around Gaza, everything she claims to stand for starts to look a little bit selective. She talks about justice, human rights, protecting the vulnerable. Fine. Where's the outrage? Where's the moral line? Because you don't get to speak about liberation and resistance in vague, sanitized terms while sidestepping the reality of what that actually includes. You don't get to frame a conflict like it's a simple story of victims and villains while ignoring the existence of a group that openly uses violence against civilians and is designated as a terrorist organization by multiple countries. That's not nuance, that's omission. And omission, when you have a platform like hers, is a choice. This is the contradiction. Greta demands absolute moral consistency from the rest of the world, but when it comes to her own activism, suddenly everything gets blurry. Suddenly, it's all context, all framing, all selective emphasis. That's not leadership, that's hypocrisy. Because if your entire message is built on the idea that we must always stand on the right side of history, then you don't get to ignore the parts of reality that complicate your narrative. You don't get to pick and choose which victims count, and you definitely don't get to speak in a way that can be interpreted as legitimizing or excusing groups whose actions directly contradict the human rights you claim to defend. Intent matters, but impact matters more. And the impact of careless, one-sided messaging in a conflict like this isn't awareness, it's distortion. It's fuel on a fire that is already out of control. And here's the bigger issue nobody wants to say. Greta's influence was built in a space, climate, where the messaging could be simplified without immediate conflict or without immediate consequences. But this isn't climate activism. This is geopolitics. This is war. This is life and death. And when you bring the same slogan-driven, absolutist mindset into this arena, you don't look principled, you look out of your depth. So no, this criticism isn't unfair, it's overdue. Because if you're going to position yourself as a global moral authority, then your principles don't just apply when they're easy or popular or trending. They apply all the time, or they don't apply at all. And that is going to be a wrap for our show this week. We will be back on Sunday at the same time. We are hoping to have Axel. I believe our sound issue should be worked out by then. So we're hoping to have Axel back this Sunday to do the interview. And sometime next week or the following week, I've got a very special human rights activist who's going to be giving us an interview as well. More information about her to follow. Avi, do you have anything to add to conclude the show?
No, I thought that was well said, and it highlights that there was a story today of the Sunrise Movement. Their climate, right? They were all about the Green New Deal, but if you follow them on social media, the Sunrise Movement is now all about Israel.
Yay. Not even surprised.
No.
Here we are. Yeah. All right. So, on that note, thank you everyone so much for tuning in. We are Maccabee Media, and now you are informed.